Welcome to the Productivity webcast series. This podcast first aired on the 2nd of March at the Shard 2017 and it's entitled Benchmarking Priorities for Today's Technology Leaders.
My name is Jonathan Wyatt. I'm a Managing Director here in London, and I'll introduce all the team as we sort of move on to the content and the core areas. There are probably 6 main trends, and many of you may have had the opportunity to download the report and read the report. If you haven't, I'd certainly encourage you to do that. But there are probably 6 main trends that we sort of picked up on, cutting throughout all of the presentation, and we're going to pick up on those as we go through today. The first one of which was really around cloud adoption, and very much picking up on the fact that its rate of adoption is very much accelerating. And equally, I think in some industries where perhaps you haven't seen high levels of adoption in the past, so particularly areas like financial services where there has been resistance to cloud for security measures and for security reasons, we're starting to see much higher levels of adoption there. So we'll touch on that. Digitization, digital transformation, digitalization, whatever you want to call it, very much a hot topic and a hot theme, and increasingly driving expenditure. Which links through to some extent to IT transformation programs. So the third area, we're seeing a lot more significant transformations, both major business change programs throughout the organization, but also transformations of IT itself, and actually seeing organizations rethink how they organize, structure, and manage IT. So we'll touch on some of that as we go through. Data analytics, which picks up on some of the digital trends around areas such as AI and artificial intelligence, data visualization tools. Once again, activities in that area very much advancing this year, so we will pick up on data. But one of our themes, I guess, that we pick up on, which is a concern, is around innovation and the amount of time, the amount of energy, the amount of money that actually is being devoted to innovation, potentially not seeing enough attention being given to innovation. And a major driver perhaps in that, which is the 6th area, the 6th trend, is cybersecurity. And the challenges of cyber, the challenges of meeting the demands of regulators and compliance, really putting a strain on budgets. And in a world that is changing very, very rapidly and evolving very rapidly, we are finding it increasingly difficult to devote the time, the energy that we'd like to innovation. So those, if you like, are the headline themes. In order to sort of run through that, we're going to break this down into 4 core topics that we're going to debate, and we'll debate them all for sort of 10-15 minutes on each. First of all, we're going to pick up on the general theme of digital, which does cut across a number of the other areas, and share a few thoughts on that. We'll then follow that, I think, naturally into some conversations around cloud. And Phil Greaves, who's the director in our team, is going to sort of lead our discussion a bit around cloud and some of the implications we're seeing from cloud. We'll then move on to the topic of data, and Scott Bolderson, a managing director in our team here in London, will help guide us through a bit of a conversation around data and data analytics. And then finally, Roland Carandang from our security and privacy team is going to give some of his thoughts around cyber and some of the issues, some of the challenges that we see in that space. We are going to try and encourage some active participation. So we've got plenty of people watching this live. So if you do want to submit questions, we'll do our best to adapt and respond to any questions that do come in. If you want to submit those questions, do use the Q&A feature online, and there's a Q&A button. If you go in through that and submit your question, it will be passed across to us, and we'll try and react and respond as best we can. Where we're struggling to respond or time is up against us, we'll do our best to come back to you after the event and respond to some of the direct questions that we've had. So if you do have questions, if you do have things that are on your mind, do share them, and we'll do our best to react. That said, anything anyone wants to say before I launch into digital, which I'll kick off with as the first of the themes, I guess, and the first of the topics. And I think a lot of what we saw as we were going through all of the areas of the summary of our survey was digital being a dominant theme. And I think very much the same, to be honest, would be true if I'm talking to clients, out with clients. it's hard to find a client at the moment where this isn't high up the agenda. I think particularly when it comes to surveys, one of our challenges with this, though, is really one of definition, because I think digital means very different things to different people. And therefore, actually often when you ask someone about a question and where they are and what they're doing in digital, they're interpreting the question in a very different way and reacting it.
Jonathan, would it be fair to say that a lot of organisations feel that digital is an IT problem rather than a business problem?
In all honesty, I think it is a business problem. It's not IT. I think many organisations are, and I was actually talking to one of the analysts yesterday, talking a little bit about some of the challenges for technology and IT transformation and how it's needing to drive behaviours. And I think one of the themes that came up was actually most businesses now are technology. Technology is the business, and it's very difficult to separate the two. Technology is no longer an enabler. It is very much part of the day-to-day. But interestingly, IT is often seen as the problem when it comes to technology enablement. So the mindset of a lot of people in the business was, well, why aren't we trying these things? Why can't we do these things? Well, actually, the response that's coming back is one of, well, I'm just not convinced we could do that. And when you challenge them as to why, well, our IT team cannot do that. And I think that is one of the things. And I think in an area like digital, if we are in a world where people's view is that IT and technology is the problem, then we're clearly going to have challenges in driving it through.
And similarly, I guess when we come onto the cyber topic, cyber is probably a perfect example as seen as a barrier to some of this innovation as well.
Absolutely. And so, yes, we'll pick up on that.
It's a theme, because actually the business can go and do this themselves nowadays. We're in a world where IT isn't a stopping or a blocker, well, they can be a blocker, sorry, but they can still go out to the market with products. There's the cloud, there's online solutions that are available to everybody. So, yeah.
So from my perspective, if we just think a little bit about definition and how we try and look at this, so say we tend to pick up on 4 key areas, and we deliberately have a broad view of digital, because I think there are opportunities in a number of different areas. And sometimes when we're challenging clients around digital, actually our clients have quite narrow views, and it'll often depend on where digital has landed in the organisation, who's owning the topic, so sometimes digital has spanned out of a marketing area, and you'll find chief digital officers that are an extension of marketing that came out of social media, and they'll have a very specific view as to what the digital agenda is, which probably won't extend into internal transformation of the business to really take advantage of technology. So we talk about it in 4 broad areas. We talk about customer engagement as being one core focus area. So building stronger, deeper relationships with customers, and in some cases even getting a relationship with the customer. So you'll find, for example, many organisations, I was actually being challenged a week or so about a fast food type store, where actually they have a lot of customers, they have huge numbers of transactions, but they know very little about their customers, because they have no sort of concept of a loyalty card, and we've all been being persuaded by retailers all the time, would you like a loyalty card? Because it's their one way of trying to get engaged with customers, or it's a non-digital way of trying to get engaged with customers. Right. And I think there are a lot of opportunities through mobile devices and apps, and the sort of mindset, you're walking down the high street, the app knows you're near the store, they ping you on your phone and offer you a discount in the store if you'll come in. And I think a lot of opportunities in that sort of space.
And even the digitisation of the loyalty card generally, like actually having the loyalty cards on your phone rather than prohibitive having them, mounting them in your wallet will probably enhance the amount of data they can collect.
Yeah, so then the second core area around new products, new services, new ways of doing things, which digital and technology provides for. We've got concepts of what we describe as, well, I guess trendy way is to describe it as decision science, but really better decision making is really what people are looking to try and achieve, and thinking about how they can use data and data analytics in better ways to achieve that. And then the 4th area, which is often overlooked, is actually what we would just simply describe as operational performance. So really just thinking about how you can look at technology and use technology in innovative and creative ways to improve performance of the business and traditional processes. And we see things like RegTech in financial services, very much playing into this space where you can start using voice recognition to analyze mortgage calls and or arrears calls. That voice recognition software can start to pick up on the tone of the conversation and flag that was a bad call, and perhaps then refer that into a subsequent process. So deliberately a broad view, and I think one of my first observations, I think, is a lot of our clients are typically focused in on one or two of them, not all four, and therefore missing out on a lot of opportunity. I think in terms of engaging and getting engaged with boards, I think this is very much now high on the board agenda. So independent of this, we do on an annual basis a study. We do it with North Carolina University, run it with some large global organizations, really just to think about board agenda priorities, what are the key issues, what are the key risks that the executive teams are most concerned around. Disruptive technology and the impact on their business is very high on that agenda now. So actually the boards are brought into it. But that's not always translating through to what I would sort of describe as a sense of urgency within the business. So yes, it's a priority. Yes, we need to do it. And then you sort of say, well, what's your plan? What's your program? Where's your A team that are driving this? It's clearly one of the things you're most concerned about. And what you actually find is there's pockets of activity, there's some things happening, but it's nowhere near as developed and as progressed as you might think. So what does that do? Well, we talked a little bit about in the study, in the survey, around what are some of the barriers and what's stopping people drive these programs forward. I think the biggest issue is consistently, well, the challenges of this quarter, this month, this quarter's results. We've got to deliver, we've got to focus on what we're trying to do. So I think that presents people a number of issues and challenges. I think what I'll describe as innovation culture remains an issue. So encouraging people to think creatively, to think about the technology, to have an awareness of technology and where it is and the levels of adoption. I think, Scott, linking back to your comment earlier, I think it does play to the fact that even if people are aware of these clever things, the technology, they've heard about them, they've seen them, their mindset is, yeah, Google could do that, we can't. Which comes back to that mindset of IT isn't able to do this type of stuff.
I think there's still an expectation that IT are leading this, and I think a lot of business people don't necessarily recognise it within their role yet. And if IT are not evangelising IT and the possibilities of some of these technologies, who is doing that in the organisation?
Yeah. And I think many IT functions are going to have to challenge themselves as to how they raise their game and raise their stakes. I think one of the things, I've talked to quite a lot of organisations and sort of picked up along as well when we were talking through the study, was that IT has typically been looking to have that seat at the board agenda. It's been a high priority thing. You go to IT directors conferences and you talk about the role of IT director and is it a board level role, and the answer traditionally has been no, and should it be, shouldn't it be? I think we're now in an area where the boards are really quite concerned about technology, the impact. They are absolutely looking to think about it. So they would welcome that sort of involvement at very senior levels and somebody to be that evangelist and to drive technology, to drive the performance of the business. But IT needs aren't stepping up.
That's it. I did actually see a very interesting comment from a research company that stated that I think it's pretty well recognised that the second person at the board table is traditionally the CFO, and actually in 10 years' time we'll be in a position where the CIO is the second person at the board table. But there are some barriers to that, as you've alluded to, is that cultural change, that willingness to innovate and drive the business forward.
And I do think the CIOs that become that will probably feel more like the COO of today. And whether they'll be called the CIO or the COO and how these two roles will come together, I think time will tell. But I do think they are people who really understand technology, but they really understand the industry, the business. They're thinking about and have a creative side to themselves to think about what we could do. Wouldn't it be great if we did this, and couldn't we do this? And then sort of make, and is seen as the type of person who will make the art of what might feel like the impossible very possible. And actually, a lot of these things are not nearly as difficult to do as a lot of the people in the business are assuming they would be, because the cloud apps, the solutions, the technologies are, to some extent, they're not quite, I'm oversimplifying, but they're to some extent plug and play. And if you can, it's more about thinking about how you would apply them to your business than it becoming the technical challenge that we need to work out how to do voice recognition or whatever it might be.
Sorry,
just joining some thoughts here. I know we've well, one of the attributes of an innovative culture would be, I think, the acceptance of failing fast. And yet you're saying that these guys have just gotten onto the table at the board level. Is there that natural tendency to want to get this too perfect before, I guess, at the expense of trying a lot of things quickly?
Yeah, and interestingly, and it picks up on a client situation. Once again, I sort of got asked the question yesterday: what's the typical length of a program these days? And how long can we take to do an IT transformation? And they were starting to talk about is 18 months. Is 18 months too quick, or is this a 2-3 year exercise? And part of the reaction was no, 18 months is too long.
Right.
Because actually over the period of 18 months, technology is going to change so fast, the opportunities are going to change so fast. And
it does bring in one of the other topics, I think, that we're not covering in the study so much, about agile development, and you're almost down to 3 or 4 week sprint cycles, and but not perhaps traditionally in the technology sense, but in the idea sense. So we've tried internally with Intuitivity about trying ideas, see whether something happens in 2 weeks before you progress on it.
It fails, and that's good. Right. I mean, I think the challenge though is, and it's a theme in the data analytics section, which is a nervousness amongst the executive outside of IT, because they're used to 2-year IT programs that are multi-million dollars, and they're used to them failing. So, you're asking me to go and innovate,
slow.
And actually, I've got little faith that this will work. It's, IT coming up with the new way of doing things. It feels like it's the same thing as it's always been, and I'm worried about that investment. So there are boards out there that, whilst it might be on their agenda, there's a real nervousness about embracing some of this stuff.
And we talk a lot when we're talking to clients around culture, and one of the big challenges, I think, when it comes to digital is the risk management culture. So actually one of the biggest risks today, which everyone is now recognizing, is failure to innovate, because others will. And it'll often be the technology companies that come in, the new entrants, with no fear factor about them, because they haven't actually got something to lose if it doesn't work.
Right.
And if the venture doesn't work, well, I'll go and have another, I'll try something else.
Right.
And that's the mindset that they're coming at it. Where you go to the traditional businesses that have got risk management ingrained within the organization, governance, control, we need to be very sensible about what we do here. And therefore, by being risk averse, you're actually potentially putting yourself in a position where your risk averse nature is resulting in the biggest risk to the business materializing.
Yeah.
And they're trying to avoid a risk, you end up creating a risk.
But also companies should not have the conscious time, but also companies shouldn't be put off too much if these new organisations are breaking into their industry, because often there's that immediate opportunity to react. So if I think about the mortgage broking business, where traditionally it's a chap and an estate agent, it takes 7 weeks. There's now an online company that are essentially offering that process within 3 hours. But the organisations with many customers with mortgages can react to that. They have to react to that, otherwise they will be left behind.
And they've got to learn how to react quickly.
Correct, yeah.
And many of them are thinking about what they need to do in that industry particularly, but they're also thinking, but this is going to take years. It's a fundamental different culture. We've got to be very we've got to start taking risks, and well, how do we do this, and how do we use this, and we plug into the data, and they're not thinking that way, and there's a whole cultural change. And whilst I think cultural change can be a continuous process over 2 to 3 years, the technology components have got to be much more piecemeal. Just one final comment on digital, and I'm conscious we need to sort of move on to make sure we pick up on other topics. But I guess one of the things that I also picked up on was one of the questions we asked was, well, how developed, how advanced, how progressed do you think your digital initiatives are? And almost alarmingly to me, actually the default response from most people in most industries was very well progressed. Whereas you then sort of start with the follow-up question around, well, so they're very well progressed. So what have been your experiences with AI in your business, and how are you using it in creative ways? Oh, we're not doing any of that yet. So to robotics, I presume it's now prevalent throughout the organisation. You've gone through your, well, no, we're trying a little pilot. But 1 minute you just said the programme is very, very well progressed. And actually you just sort of start picking up on some of the relatively basic areas where you can go after with digital. People are not really anywhere near as progressed as they are. And I think often that links back to my opening comments around scope. And actually, therefore, I think people have got quite a narrow view as to what they're trying to achieve with their digital and not thinking about all of the opportunities. I think some of it comes back to this sort of innovation culture, the ability to imagine the possible, and the willingness as an executive team to say, we need to do this, and empowering the technology function to go and do it. And I think in many organizations, we don't see that. And therefore, and I think a lot of people, wherever you are sitting in the business, whether you happen to be on the audit side, whether you happen to be perhaps organizations like ourselves coming in and consulting and challenging, really need to be, I think, challenging people to up their game, to think much more broadly, to really think about the possible, and then really bringing down and breaking down the barriers as to why that's not happening. Otherwise, as I say, the biggest risk will ultimately materialize.
And I'll just make a very quick point. This isn't just for the big organizations. This is a challenge and opportunity across multiple industries, across the breadth of organizations, from FTSE 100 right down to smaller local organizations. There's a real opportunity to embrace this.
So a component of digital, at least when we're talking to a lot of people, is cloud adoption. Where do we use it? The opportunities that cloud presents, both therefore presenting new solutions for people to actually offer their services in a different way via the cloud. So they can be service providers, but equally adopters of the cloud and taking advantage of some of these new emerging technologies. So Phil, do you want to share a few of your thoughts around cloud?
Yeah, so one of the things that's come out of the study, and is certainly consistent with, I think, our client experience, is the acceleration of cloud adoption. I think in the study, two-thirds of the respondents are investing heavily in cloud. When you look at consumer and retail, which is obviously dominated by names such as Amazon, clearly, ASOS, for example, in the clothing sector, that percentage goes up to 4 out of 5 are investing within cloud technology, and this trend is expected to continue to accelerate further over the next 2 to 3 years. I think a lot of that growth is being driven by software as a service solutions. So these are out-of-the-box applications such as Salesforce is one of the well-known examples, which is giving the business very quick, and I think you made the point earlier, Scott, it's giving the business very quick access to best-of-breed solutions without perhaps some of the lengthy implementation cycles that have existed in the past.
Yeah.
There is also significant growth in infrastructure as a service and platform as a service coming through as well. One of the interesting things we're seeing, clearly the retail and consumer sector, I mentioned Amazon, for example, has been driven by a lot of consumer demand for the digital channel, excuse me. But what we're also seeing is some industries such as financial services who have traditionally been perhaps more conservative in terms of their adoption of new technologies, that it's really starting to gain traction in financial services.
And what do you think caused that conservativeness? What are their concerns? I mean, there's a lot of very clever people in the banks. I know we don't all agree with that, but what caused that? What was that fear factor?
I think some of it is clearly driven by regulatory pressure. There's been a lot of scrutiny clearly over the financial service sector over the last 5 to 10 years. Yeah. They have very large legacy estates. So one of the things we see coming through the survey is some of the challenges. They're not specific to cloud necessarily, but that migration path from legacy infrastructure to a much more modern infrastructure platform can be incredibly complex and incredibly challenging. Clearly, some of that acceleration, we've seen the Financial Conduct Authority put out a guidance paper last year.
Okay.
It's which is, I think, reflecting the amount of activity and the demand from the industry for a formal position from the regulator in terms of guidance. There's some very big brands in the market. Barclays, for example, are very out in the market publicly in terms of their cloud strategy, and that moves from everything from migrating core infrastructure through to they now have a service, for example, that provides your documents in the cloud, and that's not just if you are a Barclays banking customer. They're also facilitating you to make your home paperless in terms of all the bills, all all the statements that you get from other financial institutions, that you can consolidate those within their cloud portal?
I think, for the cloud, there's 2 points off there. One is, and all of the big banks have heavily invested in digital organisations, and those digital organisations, there's a bunch of them over in Canary Wharf. They are financed by the bank. So, and interesting, back to the regulator's actually been quite vocal about the need for automation, analytics, embracing new technology, because they don't feel that the banks can regulate themselves effectively without embracing technology. So you have a much more effective regulatory environment by leveraging digital technologies. So.
Yes, I was just going to say, I think part of the rush to the cloud, or certainly my conversation with clients, has been they rushed into it on the promise of significant cost saving. What they've then ended up finding is it's not always been as easy to get those cost savings as perhaps they first hoped. And if anything, they've seen their costs escalating quite significantly as people are using more and more technology and embracing the technology, and some of that might be a positive in some ways, that it relates to the fact that actually they're able to get these infrastructure and services, and they can get the access to an environment that might be difficult to provide quickly, and therefore they ask for it, and then they realise they can have that, or I can have one of these and one of these, and therefore the business starts demanding more and more. But it can suddenly then result in cost pressures. And what would be your experience from a cost management perspective?
So I think one of the issues, legacy estate is driving some cost up front in terms of cloud deployment. But on the flip side, I think one of the issues, whilst you're right in terms of cloud being an enabler to do lots of things that perhaps we wouldn't have done in the past, one of the things that perhaps hasn't come in with cloud is the effective IT processes to support that. So you can very quickly spin up an environment, you can adapt your infrastructure to deal with a marketing campaign. You're a credit card provider, you can spin up that infrastructure to deal with that expected surge in demand. Unless you have the effective change management, the monitoring of that infrastructure to actually pare down that infrastructure, what we're seeing in that example is that organisations are ramping up, but they're never actually pulling it down to deal with
the costs are actually increasing.
So sort of the benefit in the concept that you can have a server for 5 hours, 10 hours to testing. We can switch it on, we can switch it off, we can switch it on, we can switch it off. They're doing a very good job of switching it on, but perhaps not quite such a good job.
And I wonder if that's because those costs are being incurred in different parts of the business. So the business is driving the use of cloud, they're incurring the cost in the business. IT is none the wiser, so they're not seeing those.
It sounds like there's an interesting, so the calculation seems to be off. They're comparing just the cost we spent today on IT hosting, for example, versus what we're spending on it before, or what we used to spend on it. In security, we often find people make that comparison as well, when they should be saying, actually, if we were to do this, what we're doing today in the cloud versus what we would have to do and spend on our internal systems, that's a better calculation than what we spend today versus what we spent yesterday.
Yeah.
Is that fair?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think on the security point, I think one of the other things, that is very much seen as one of the other barriers, as well as cost, that's coming through in the survey, is some of the complexities to think about in terms of security. So roles and responsibilities, for example. You may be outsourcing a lot, some of your risk to your third party, but ultimately you will still be responsible for lots of those security processes. Perhaps patching, for example, as an example, something that may be done by your cloud provider, depending on the service you're receiving, but perhaps management of identity or endpoint security. So it's very important to have that distinction between who's doing what. Similarly, some of your tooling, some of your monitoring tools. Some organizations are going wholesale cloud, but many have a hybrid situation with a mixture of cloud and on-premise. And some of the complexities around how those tools actually span across your two environments can introduce some complexity into your organisation.
Yeah, I think which all links back to some of the cost issues as well, when people are going through that transition, that the promise is great, the savings come if and only if we can dispose of the legacy infrastructure, and unless you can work out how to therefore complete that transition and that migration, it's very easy to see how you end up in a period in the middle with a peak.
Yeah.
I think one other thing, we when we do digital, and we have a slightly different way of tackling digital, where we tend to, because we were talking a bit about, people tend to think about phases and think about programs, and you have an idea and you go through very much a traditional approach. Our philosophy sort of looks at it slightly differently, where we tend to step back and look at organisations and start by saying, well, these are the capabilities and competencies that digital leaders are really good at, and therefore, how do you stack up against a digital leader? Where are you really strong? And clearly, those are things you should look to exploit. Where have you got challenges and issues, and how do you address and respond to that? And one of those 36 capabilities that we've sort of built into the framework and model we use is the topic of vendor management. And interestingly, I was talking to someone about the framework and got the comment back that that's a bit old-fashioned, that's traditional stuff, isn't it? And I said, well, you're probably not picturing vendor management in the way I'm picturing vendor management, because a real digital leader really knows how to work with a vendor and to partner with a vendor and really to collaborate and to partner. And if you think about most IT outsourcing deals, IT outsourcing contracts, a lot of what you will have seen is situations where give it 2-3 years and you're going to have a big breakdown in the relationship between your partner and that frustration, which comes down to they're not good at working, partnering, collaborating and teaming. And as we get into some of the real cloud space, a lot of the tech companies that have got brilliant tools, brilliant ideas that are going to really differentiate and enable us to differentiate, aren't going to meet any of our governance framework requirements and structures. We know that. They don't have the financial security that we would like. They don't have necessarily the security and governance and processes in place. If you're in financial services, they have no idea what it means to operate and comply with financial services regulation. So how do you deal with all of that and partner with them? We don't turn them off. We've got to actually find a way of becoming jointly invested and teaming. And therefore, when you start talking about digital leaders, they're starting to talk about incubator funds, and we're investing in them, and we're sharing in the risk, we're sharing in the reward. It's a very different way of looking at a vendor relationship than people traditionally.
And I think the other thing is the traditional approach to vendor risk management, which is quite often focused post-contract in terms of managing risk, is much harder to do with cloud, because much of what you're receiving cloud is a leveraged solution across multiple clients, and therefore they are providing you their security model, which is standard across all their clients. So it's much more important to be having that discussion right up front and to help influence your decision. And there is a big variety in terms of maturity still, in terms of some of these cloud providers as well. So factoring in your decision as to which one you go to up front is particularly important.
Can I ask? So I'm about to cut him off on cloud. one part.
Sorry, it sounded like you guys were alluding to the fact that, so traditionally, we used to do these sort of annual 200 question ceremonies with our vendors. It sounds like you guys are saying there's a different way of doing this, because now we might have thousands of vendors who are in the cloud. Are we suggesting
and it's not and I guess my mindset is this ultimately is not about policing the vendors and coming up with the reasons why not.
Right, so quick shift.
This is a complete different mentality of these guys are great, they've got some brilliant ideas which we could take advantage of them. How do we work together to get to a point that this works for us?
Right.
And that is a very, very different way of looking at this. And it's much more about seeing this as a joint collaborative thing. Now, you've got to also then recognise, well, how do you manage that in the context of, well, if we put all of this investment into them, aren't they then going to just go and team up with one of our competitors? And that's all part of the working, knowing how to work with vendors in a very, very different way.
Right. But there is still risk there. I'm going to segue straight into my second, if you don't mind.
Fine, yeah. So let's get on to the topic of data.
It's about data, and data in the cloud does have risk, and I think yes, you can be innovative, you can embrace the new ways of working, but there is still risk there, and we need to understand how we manage that risk. I mean, I think we all know that data and data analytics underpins the digital agenda. I think it's absolutely fundamental to why we do digital. Ultimately, it's all about the information. So it's very important that we understand what we can do. I think your example earlier on with regards to the retail company, building an app that would allow customers to walk in, they know when their customer will come in, how often the customer will come in, what sort of products is the customer buying. It's hugely valuable information in terms of what your products are, how you engage the customer. So I find it a fascinating area.
And they're very, very good at doing it. If you have a loyalty card,
Yep.
and or if you're doing it online, so if you do your online shopping, they're very, very good at it. Have you thought about this? Here's a few suggestions. These are things you haven't bought for a while. Maybe they're running out as well. Applying that into a general physical world where actually you're not even in the shop yet, but they know you're nearby and they're trying to say, have you forgotten us? We're over here. And then when you get in there saying, actually, there's some things over here. You can walk to this bit of the store. If you walk to that side of the store, you might quite like some of these things. It's a very different way of thinking.
I think it is, and I think that's fundamental to the analytics piece. I think it's having the capability and knowledge to recognise that value and that opportunity, that ideas culture, and I think it's actually still relatively rare. But don't forget, internal to the organisation as well. I mean, it's not just about the customer. We can perform our internal processes far more effectively, and there's some real opportunities. The one that springs to mind immediately is audit analytics, being far more effective and completing your coverage of how you audit your organisation through data. Certainly that some of my clients in the banks, we've built analytical solutions that allow them to monitor the trading environment much more effectively, and that can only be done through data. You go from a sample-based look at a few trades over a short period of time to now complete coverage, every trade, every day, globally. We have a much higher degree of control, clearly.
Yeah, and I think one of the things as well, when you're picking up on sort of those types of examples, is though actually people thinking slightly more broadly about what data is available. Because I think they tend to focus on traditional data, the core things that they've got, things that are immediately available today. And we'll see this in KYC processes and onboarding processes with banks. There's all sorts of external data sets that could be tapped into real time if people wanted to use them, but people are not naturally drawing on them to the same extent.
And also creating that data. The app example is the perfect one. If it was available, what could you tap into? I think that's really fascinating. And by the way, that makes the analytics problem really quite interesting and quite thought-provoking and quite intellectual. I think, in terms of the survey, I think the barriers to change, fundamentally the biggest barrier here is cost. But I think that's underpinned by a number of other issues which are cultural, and you've already alluded to them really, which is a willingness amongst the executive to embrace some of these ideas and support them, and by the way, fund them. I think we come out of a culture where yes, it's possibly seen as IT, and possibly we might have invested on many IT programs in the past, of which 75% have failed. We haven't realised the value, so we've got to get over that barrier as well. I think,
but is it really cost, or is it really picking up on a capability? Because I think we've got an awful lot of very bright, very clever data scientists who sort of know the how to do, but aren't necessarily the people who can think about the what. I think the people who are very good at the what could we do aren't actually necessarily as aware and educated of what is now possible and what is actually relatively easy, which comes back to the conversation we were having earlier around IT barriers and people turning around and saying, you could never do that. Not actually thinking, well, you just have to buy an app. It's actually not that difficult to do. So the two groups of people need to work out how to work together.
You completely made the point. It's think about the what, which is exciting and interesting. Don't necessarily worry about the how. There are a myriad of tools, technology, and by the way, people that can help you with the how. And analytics invariably is about multiple tools and technologies. It's about bringing together different aspects of those tools and technologies. There isn't a one size fits all here. So I think they've really, really got to embrace that. I think the other issue is around the short-term priorities. I won't labour the point you've already measured, but we do, it's very natural for us to drop into that sort of head in sand culture. We've got a monthly target, a quarterly target. We do it ourselves. We do it ourselves. That's human nature. And we just need to bring our heads above the sand a little bit, but with the right people.
So just responding though to a couple of questions in terms of things like privacy. So one of the big issues with all of this, it's all great, you're talking about this, you're talking about an app, you can walk down the road and it will jump in and it'll track people's location. Isn't privacy a big problem here? And how do we overcome that? And how do we react and respond to that?
Yeah, I think privacy is a big subject. Data governance here is the elephant in the room, essentially. And certainly we've seen in our clients a lot of people trying to solve that problem on an enterprise-wide basis, and often that fails. and it basically isn't sustainable. I think where we are looking at very strategic solutions that do leverage cloud, data analytics solutions, data analytics solutions in the cloud, we can then really focus on what the real data privacy issues might be, or risks might be, and manage those risks as regards the solution. And then almost it's compliance by stealth to some extent. If it was an employee piece of data, for example, let's say we were doing some fraud analytics activity, we were using the third party to do that, or we might replace the employee name with an employee ID number. But we've at least had the conversation. That means we're managing the risk appropriately.
And I actually have time, as I say, I asked the question just responding to, I guess, a question coming in. But from my perspective, I think you do find that it is relatively easy sometimes to get people's consent. So if you can entice most of us, not all of us, but most of us use Google Maps. We love using Google Maps. It relies absolutely on Google Maps and all the traffic, and absolutely relies on us effectively consenting for our location information to be used, but we get value from it.
Exactly. You get the pop-up window, don't you? And use the location.
Charging someone with discounts, they want the discounts, they want that. So there will be plenty of people who naturally do consent. It will bring us into some of the security challenges of, well, as you're collecting more and more complex data where you need to do it, I think it integrates a lot of the digital strategy with privacy and other things, because I think you can find, and I've seen it in a number of organisations, the two going off at a tangent. Yeah. So the ideas teams are throwing out ideas, building the tools, no real thought about how this is actually going to fit into things like GDPR and are we allowed to do this and when we go. They're already off building.
But what is it? It's the classic conundrum we've had for 25 years, which is software developers don't think about security, and security don't think about software development, and the two sides have always been completely separated. So it's very similar from that perspective. I mean, what I would say is there are some practical challenges to the data analytics piece, not just issues around risk and governance, but also around the technologies, the legacy infrastructure that organisations are having to deal with. Data is often over many disparate systems, and how do we gather that together? We've got legacy infrastructure out there, mainframes. Getting data out of an AS400 is quite difficult, and having it on a regular basis such that you can support ongoing analytics is a challenge. So we've got to get around those. But there are people out there are organisations out there that have solutions around this. So don't see them as barriers. And just to emphasise Jonathan's point, it really is about stepping back and thinking, what can we do here? What is the opportunity? And really embrace that as an activity, and then worry about the how afterwards. What I would say, though, in closing, essentially, is it is the big opportunity here. I think solutions can be quite rapid, they can be quite focused, fail fast, and I think it's an area that certainly will grow extensively once we can get through some of those cultural barriers over the next couple of years.
Yeah, and I think people have got to get over I think the word big data got used all the time, and then people, I think, actually in many cases almost got confused about, well, what is this really all about? It's got to be huge, it's got to be large, it's got to be, whereas actually I think people really just need to get back to some of the business opportunities, to be very creatively about what could we do and how could we do it. You've got to encourage, it comes back to digital at its heart, of that innovation culture and the ideas and what could we do, what would we like to do. You'll often find the young workforce are absolutely superb at coming with these. They've grown up with this. This is what they see as normal, and none of us like to think of ourselves as getting older, but equally, you then look at the generation coming through, and you're sitting there thinking, surely they would put that out on the public domain. Why would they publish that? They don't think the same way. So I think the privacy concerns that maybe some of the decision makers have got don't actually translate through to the consumers, and I think people can therefore not get hung up on that.
I am conscious of time, so it'd be great to hear your thoughts on cyber.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think in terms of just the data, and I'll be careful here because I think when we introduce even the topic of cyber, it almost sounds like it's a discrete thing to be managed and dealt with in a dark room in an organization. So in this conversation, I'll try to keep it in the context of business change and enablement. But what does the data say? For those of you who haven't read the survey, I think there's some highlights here that basically we're spending lots of money. We still feel very insecure. We are now blocking innovation because of that spend to some degree, but also because we feel like we can't enable that change securely. The data also suggests, in terms of the priorities that we've listed in there, that organizations fully expect to have incidents and breaches, and we expect those incidents to come from every threat actor that we can imagine, from your bedroom hacker to your sophisticated organized crime, nation state, as well as trusted users we have in the organization. So the key sort of exam question for us in cyber, which is not an easy one to answer, is how do we more effectively secure ourselves against all of these threat actors for less money? Good luck, right? Yeah. So fundamentally, we need to change. So I think that's obviously one of the big themes that we have in here. We know that this wave of change is coming. We know that we can't just say, no, you can't do that. We need to do some things better. So what do we do today? So as a start,
I think there's an added dilemma that's being thrown into this mix as well, particularly, and you're seeing it, quite a lot of regulation sort of developing in financial services in the US off the back of a number of insurance, major data incidents and data breaches requiring high levels of regulation. So add to your dilemma of we achieve more, we do it more efficiently, more effectively, and less money. And guess what? The regulation is only just getting started. And is going to begin to pile up and mount and innovate at the same time, and make sure you've got enough time and money to do that, because otherwise you're pretty secure, but you won't exist anymore.
Right.
So there's your problem.
Yeah, it's even bigger, right? So we think about, we've got a bucket of water here, right? And there's a bunch of holes in it. That's what we have today as our issues. Right now, the way we approach that, we just try to put our finger in each of those. But now, instead of one person pouring water into that, we have more regulators pouring their bucket into it as well. And now, because of you guys talking about all this innovation and exciting change, we have other people from the business pouring their water in as well. We can't possibly try to fill all those holes in that bucket. So what do we then do? So again, in terms of this normal approach that we take, we will often say, okay, step back. We have some security better practices. Again, go back to that 200 question approach we take. Let's assess ourselves against all of these things across the business, which is, again, that's just a normal sort of compliance way of doing it. The way that we do it in financial services specifically, or highly regulated industries, is we say, a regulator says you need to go and do this. And we say, oh, okay, that sounds really hard. Let's just do the easiest functionality of that solution, or the easiest control, and apply it across the board. So when we do that, either of these things are really disconnected from the business. The business, after spending months and months on assessment of that security framework, you go to them with a prioritized list of things to do, and they say, so what? What does that matter today? So I think one of the big challenges that we face, and Jonathan alluded to this before, is one of definition. Quite often we walk into the organizations now, there'll be a list of their top 10 risks. And the first 9 of those are really meaningful things about the business. Number 10 is cyber. So yeah, we're on the list now. There's no detail behind that. People sort of assume everybody knows what it is, but nobody really does. And that's why when you go back for budget later on, they say, well, actually, I don't know if this really means anything to me. Now, if you go, and when you ask people in the business, what is cyber? What are the cyber risks that bother you? And immediately they're trying to talk cyber. They'll say, oh, I got a phishing attack recently. I got an email for that. That's something you guys do, right? Or I know that I can use my USB drive however way I like. Surely that's a cyber risk that I'm talking about. So in a way, we've made people talk cyber. And when you ask cyber people what they think about in cyber, they say, oh, have you heard about the kill chain? Of course they haven't heard about the kill chain, but these are things that cyber people talk about. I think that the big challenge for us is just making this much more meaningful. So a very different approach. If you go to the head of trading in your front office organizations, and you say, one of the key risks that you have in that top 9 of meaningful risks is key person dependencies and retention of those people. Today, all of these people's pay packages, including your very sort of controversial variable compensation schemes, are available to everybody in HR and everybody in IT. Is that okay? That's the cyber we need to be talking about. And that's something that can say, actually, that's not okay. What are the options I have for that? Now, when you go away, and you don't want to go away and take each of those things and say, here's a point solution for you, point solution for you. We've all agreed it's a good idea. Now we have 10 point solutions.
And I think why they understand is that would have previously, before the days of being talked about cyber, would have been considered an HR risk or a compensation risk. And it's trying to bring that cyber threat into a language which they understand, because that risk has existed for decades. It's just the way we're thinking about it, and all that data is now on a system.
And if you think of how we used to deal with HR data security risks, what do we normally talk about? Personal identifiers. And that's why people in the front office are saying, I care about it, but not more than I care about keeping my key traders involved. And yet that's where all of our focus has been, and that's why they say so what. But now if we're talking about what are their strategic risks and saying you've got a better answer for it, then that's where we're listening.
And another component I think we've seen when we talk to people about these sort of issues and challenges, and it's odd, but what you're describing when we have these conversations with clients is sort of seen as a slightly alien approach. But when you actually get them to articulate, well, you said cyber is important. what do you actually mean by that?
Right.
And I've often we talk quite a lot here about banking just being London-centric, but we're working across industry. But you'll find the sort of situation where we can't afford to lose customer data.
Right.
1 record, 2, 100, 1,000. When has it reached the point that it's unacceptable?
Right.
And clearly, the idealistic answer is it's 1. We can't afford to lose any. But that's an impractical goal. Your control levels will be very, very difficult to achieve that.
Yeah.
So when you start then raising the game, how do we adapt what we're doing in that type of an environment? I think is one of the challenges. And when you get people to articulate that, and when you get the very clear message coming back from the business, well, where do we actually think the real threats are coming from?
Yeah.
And what are the top 10, 20, 30 things you're most concerned about? And then we ask security, well, how good are we at preventing any of these? The honest answer normally comes back quite quick, we couldn't prevent many of those, but that's far too difficult. But we have made a lot of progress. And that disconnect is a major, major challenge, because we need to, ultimately, the most important things that we're solving are the things at the top of that agenda.
Right.
And I played a lot when I at times deliberately be provocative, use sort of the term that I actually think pen tests can sometimes do more harm than good.
Right. Yeah.
And I think one of the issues that I'm really trying to get at, I'm not actually suggesting don't do pen tests. I think the problem is the pen tests have got a wrong branding, because a pen test is doing something very, very specific.
Right.
It's looking for known vulnerabilities, typically relatively simplistic approaches to breaking in. It is not, are we impenetrable? And actually, if you turn the pen test around, not from looking at systems and vulnerabilities, but actually saying, right, this year's pen test is going to take one of those top 20 risks, and we're really going to ask ourselves the question, could it happen?
Right.
And how would it happen? You quickly actually come back with the security guys coming up with all the things that they could do if they were on the other side that they could do to get around it. Yeah. And then we'd start plugging very, very different security vulnerabilities that we do today.
Just to pick up on a couple of those things, because I think you've alluded to a very useful point. You're sort of mentioning how we quantify this risk. And I think the experience that we've had doing this more top-down approach about what it is you care about, people are not as pushy as we thought they might be around a qualitative risk appetite. What we come to them with is all these people that we spoke to who report up at a fairly senior level believe in this being a problem. All they really want to do, so they know they've already agreed they have to do something about that. All they want to know is that we're doing this in a commercially sensible way. So it's not exactly a reverse auction, what's the cheapest way of fixing it? But they've already accepted they need to do something. They don't need us to provide that quantification to buy into that, which has been surprising.
Yeah, and it's interesting actually. We're also, for the information security professionals out there, there's a side benefit to this, by the way. And it's about awareness and understanding of actually what the information security function does and is capable of. And because you've got it in the context of the business, so you can treat it almost as an internal marketing exercise, because traditionally information security be hidden away in that dark room at the back, and it's a bit of a cost if we don't really understand what they do.
Right.
Now actually you're engaging with the organisation, you're demonstrating some form of value.
Absolutely.
You're catering to their requirements, giving them peace of mind. Helping them face the future with confidence. But and actually we've been helping a particular organisation articulate that strategy and activity into the business.
Right.
Because they've been through this exercise with us, and there's a lot of good willingness towards information security function as a result. So, information security professionals shouldn't underestimate that opportunity.
Absolutely. So yeah, instead of going to them with that long report with a bunch of findings and here are our recommendations, sign off on this, you're starting with what is your business case for cyber?
And
I can argue with that.
And that can be a big exercise. So you need to divide and conquer to some extent, but it's been hugely valuable for.
But you bring it back to a capability question again, because actually you will often find what we're really saying is the security team and security professionals need to facilitate a conversation with the head of trading. Go and talk to the head of trading. You need to help him articulate his risk appetite.
Right.
And that's not necessarily where your technical security guys are. And therefore you need to find a way of building into that security environment.
Yeah, and instead of making them speak cyber, you need to speak business to them. And that's a very uncomfortable change for a lot of people.
It's interesting. The way I describe it is a front office information security team versus a back office.
Yeah.
And how often is that back office security function not engaged with business change, going into new markets, talking about your example, if you had let's say you're an online trading organisation, how you engage your customer is really important.
Right.
But that customer needs to understand that their data is secure. You need to be thinking about what gadgets can I give to the customer that gives them that confidence.
Yeah.
So we've all got the online banking keys that HSBC and the likes have. It's what technologies can we leverage to increase the security levels. But information security should have a seat at the table.
Yeah.
And that's where it's really quite interesting.
And that has to happen early, not an assessment afterwards.
Correct.
When it's too late and will just be seen as a blocker to a nice bit of innovation that the company.
Absolutely.
I think there's a real danger that these security professionals are facing, and it's, yes, they need to be at the table, but no, they don't have a new approach to this. We're starting to see almost an active avoidance of security for large strategic projects. So some Hadoop-based projects for big data, if we can still use that word, again, as a default, that infrastructure is completely open.
Yeah.
Do we care if anybody gets into that? Maybe we don't. Do we know how to secure it? Probably not.
Time's up, guys. So
We're on the red button now.
We're on the red button. Yeah. That little voice isn't talking into my ears. I think we need to end. But we are out of time, so we do just need to quickly close and wrap up. I guess what's probably clear here, there's an awful lot we can talk about on all of these topics. To be honest, we could probably, and maybe we should, come back and spend an hour on each of the topics and get into them in a little bit more detail. Hopefully we found that a helpful conversation to sort of be a part of, sparked a few ideas. Just thinking through, I guess, in a little bit of a recap, I think there's some challenges around digital, and really have we got that digital culture within our organisation? Are we really managing digital risk and the risk that is of being disrupted? Or are we managing or finding ourselves in a situation where what we're really looking at is digital projects and managing the risk of projects that are on the agenda? And I think trying to therefore think a little bit broad and think broad about scope. We touched a lot on cloud and some of cloud adoption. I think one of the themes that came up through that was around the vendors and vendor risk and a new way of working with cloud partners and thinking about how you are set up as an organisation to do that. We talked a little bit about escalating costs, and that sort of flows through to equally some of the conversations I think we had around the security side, around escalating costs. How do you manage that? And clearly, I think if IT leaders are going to step up and want that position at the board agenda and be part of the board agenda above, then they need to be spending more of their time on the transformation of the business,
Right.
less of their time potentially on security and that dominating the agenda. Because whilst that is very much up the board agenda, the board doesn't want to spend the board meetings talking about security. And therefore, I think that'll be one of the challenges. And then we really just touched on data, I think, and some of the opportunities it presents. I think it cuts through everything that we've got. So I think a lot of opportunities. I think we should regroup and do some of these sessions more often, and we will look to get some feedback from people around the session, how it's gone. It's a little bit of an experiment from our side to sort of open up a bit of an internal discussion around some of our perspectives and views, which I hope has been helpful. I think we're equally, obviously, more than happy to come and talk to people. So I think if we raise some topics that are of interest, many of you have got a direct relationship with us, do drop us a line and organise for that, and we'd be delighted to come out and talk to you. So with that, I'm conscious we are spot on 1 o'clock, so we're just about managed to time. So thanks very much, everyone. Thanks for all of you for contributing your time today to the discussion, and thanks for everybody who joined us, and I hope you found the session worthwhile.